Good morning, everyone. I'm sure we'll be joined by a few more folks. Welcome to our 5th meeting of the Trail User Working Group. I'm Devin Reef, Principal Planner with the Park District. And we are pleased again that you can join us for what is another one of our perspectives meetings. This one is from the perspective of the conservation groups. So we have presentations from Norman LaForce of the Sierra Club, Naomi Wilson from the Regional Park Association, Jim Hansen from the California Native Plant Society, and Pam Young from Golden Gate Audubon. And I will go over the agenda today. Amanda, can you share that on your screen? The agenda, that is. Okay, great. So we are, after I go over the agenda, we'll hear some announcements from Brian Holt, our chief. Then Lou will give us some reflections on our previous meeting back in April. And then we begin a series of presentations from the conservationist perspective. But before we do that, we always set up some Park District framing. And today we're joined by my colleague, Naomi Lavall, who's a principal planner with us in planning trails and GIS. Sean Dugan, who would normally give the framing, is out of town. Then we'll have about 35 to 40 minutes of presentations. And then we've set aside 10 minutes for an open group discussion as people have initial reactions to what they've been presented. And then we'll go into our breakout groups where we have 2 questions. We'll take a brief break and then we'll have a report back. And then we've got some unprogrammed time at 11:40 to continue the discussion as a group. We'll wrap up today with some next steps in the future meetings and any member announcements. We want to hear about your organizations. And then we'll close by noon. So I know we may have 1 or 2 new staff people like Lieutenant Phelps who are on the call. Let's just see, and Sean Connolly. So let's see, Lieutenant Phelps, could you just introduce yourself? I know you're in for Captain Breed today.
Hopefully everybody can see me. It looks like my video camera is on. Good morning, everybody. I'm Lieutenant David Phelps, obviously with East Bay Regional Park District, and I've been here for 22 years. I work for Captain Lance Breed, and I'm one of 2 patrol watch commanders. And everybody's participation here is very much appreciated by us. And I've heard a lot of good things from Captain Breed about the discussions that have gone on in here. I see a lot of faces I recognize and a lot of names I recognize, and it's nice to be here and see everybody. I meant to try and preview a lot of the previous videos to try and catch up on the past meetings. I think Devin said this is the 5th meeting. As I get time later today, I plan on watching some of those videos, at least some of the important parts, and some of the group discussions. But Captain Breed has briefed me that it's a pretty worthwhile group, which I applaud y'all for coming together and doing this. I've asked Devin to include me in future meetings. I wouldn't mind attending with Captain Breed. I'll give it back to you, Devin.
Great, thanks, Lieutenant Phelps. Sean and Suzanne, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to introduce yourselves to the group, but you've been participating, and now you'll be our note takers today, and you're important members of our staff here.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Wilson. I work in the Trails Development Department. I'm the senior planner there, working for Sean Dugan, and I have been attending all of the Trail User Working Groups meeting and have facilitated a few of the, or been a note taker for a few of the breakout groups. So I'll be playing that same role today. And then I'll also step in and answer any technical questions about the process of trail design and determining trail alignments and what we look for with a conservation lens, should those questions come up in our open group discussion in lieu of Sean.
Sean, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, my audio was a little delayed there. Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Connolly. I'm the Trails Coordinator. I work with Suzanne and Sean Dugan. So I've been here a little bit in a couple of the other meetings, but I'm happy to be back again. And I will also be taking notes, and I can help out where appropriate to chime in about technical issues and trails, just like Suzanne did. So, hello.
Great. And then one more new face for you all is Naomi Lavall. So Naomi, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Naomi Lavall. I work in the Planning, Trails, and GIS department. I'm the principal planner for the Interagency Planning unit, and I also focus primarily on conservation lands, so lands with special protections like conservation easements or the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy. Yeah, and I'm happy to be joining all of you today. I've definitely been hearing lots of great things about how the conversation has been going, and it's definitely a well-needed forum to work through these different perspectives. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Naomi. Okay, Brian, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Devin, and good to see you all again. I'll apologize. I got a little bit of construction going on, so hopefully it's not too distracting here. I'm gonna be kind of jumping in and out of the meeting today. I've got some other things going on as well, but hoping to stay for as long as I can. But just yeah, really appreciate everybody being here again, and looking forward to having the conservation perspective here. Just some quick district updates, I guess, is that we continue, like the rest of the world, starting to look towards, you know, what a new normal looks like, as we start to continue to get together and meet with our colleagues out in the field and in person. It's been really nice to be able to do that, making plans for returning to the office. And I know there's discussions about, you know, when we can have, you know, in-person meetings again, and all of that sort of stuff. So, so we're looking forward to that. Our swim facilities are largely open. Those that are closed not for COVID purposes, but because of drought and water quality purposes. But otherwise, some facilities are open, camping's open, and the parks continue to see just a lot of use and a lot of love, and so we appreciate that. So, so I just wanted to just sort of start out with acknowledging that everybody in this group is an environmentalist. You have all given your time graciously, generously. You've been dedicated to the Park District, some for many years, and you all care passionately about open spaces and our natural lands. So, so I think it's important to acknowledge that everybody here is a lover of the environment, and certainly being a mountain biker or an equestrian or anything else is not mutually exclusive of also being a protector of the environment. And many organizations and other open space organizations in Santa Cruz, Marin County, and others, you know, there's real strong partnerships between user groups and the conservation organizations to partner to protect resources and to provide public access. So whether it's, you know, trail improvement projects or restoration projects. I know I was talking to a colleague of mine who's on the state board of the California Native Plant Society, and is also an avid mountain bike advocate. And you know, she described in Marin County how they got together with the Native Plant Society and the mountain biking groups and formed wildflower rides. You know, so everybody could kind of, you know, get out and look at wildflowers during the peak season, and then also, you know, build some mountain bike advocacy and do so in a sustainable way. Just acknowledging, I mean, resource protection is at the center of what we do as staff. We have we have a dual mandate as an agency to protect natural resources and cultural resources and to provide for public access. So resource protection really drives everything we do. It drives our acquisition efforts. It drives our planning efforts, it drives our permitting efforts, and it continues to be a long-term stewardship and management challenge. So we hear often from a lot of the environmental stakeholder groups that we'll hear from today. We have a separate environmental roundtable, so we hear their concerns often. I do just want to acknowledge there has been a lot of disinformation that has been shared recently with regards to what's going on in Briones, with regards to the Park District's position on multi-use trails. And I'll just say it's not helpful. It's challenging to work through some of that misinformation as our board responds and reacts to it. And really what we're trying to do is do what I think everybody has as a shared goal here, is identify a way to continue to provide for the public's enjoyment of our parks in a sustainable way that is protective of resources. So I think we do acknowledge that trails have impacts. I mean, that's regardless of use, regardless of if you're a mountain biker, an equestrian, or a hiker, human presence on trails have an impact. It's our job to figure out how to manage that, plan for that, and do that in the least impactful way possible, and in a way that continues to be sustainable. What I do want folks to consider is the impact of doing nothing. And that's what we are seeing in a lot of our parklands right now. As we have huge demand for access to our parklands, and recognizing that our folks are, like Lieutenant Phelps is not going to be able to police every action within the public parklands, that there's a need to develop and manage facilities that meet the needs of our users. And the impact of doing nothing is that we see the expansion of user-built trails, social trails that don't go through the extensive planning process that we do, that Naomi will share. So with that, looking forward to this conversation. I'm hoping it will be productive, respectful, and solutions oriented. So with that, I'll hand it back over. Thank you.
Great. Devin, yeah, I assume you want me to just go right on into the next agenda item. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Brian, for addressing a number of things that are up with the district, and a reminder that we are all here to hear from one another and join in the conversation to optimize the trail experience for everyone, while, as you said, keeping conservation and environmental stewardship top of mind as well. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. My job in this moment is to just remind us of our last meeting, which was focused on the equestrian perspective. We had some really great presentations from the equestrian groups, very helpful in understanding how horses behave, how humans on horses behave, et cetera, and some of the impacts that has on our trail system and other users. I think something that seems to be emerging in our conversations as far as an approach towards strategies is thinking about engineering, education, and enforcement as sort of the three-legged stool of helping to manage trails to the benefit of all. So engineering being what strategies can we use to design trails in such a way that minimizes conflicts and preserves the environmental resources? How can we educate folks, make it clear what's allowed and what's supported in our trails, and maybe what some of the dangers and potentials for conflict are. And then enforcement, as Brian mentioned, there's not a large enforcement staff at the district. So how do we become citizen scientists and citizen, enforcers, if you will, in the small e version of that word? So I think that was evident. Those three elements were evident in the conversations we had with the equestrian perspective last time. And lastly, just in terms of the shared resources, our working group website continues to be a repository for issues and statements and resources, both within the district and also from other districts around the Bay Area and around the country that can serve as models and examples for us. And just to highlight one thing, I know that in the past, since we last met, the land bank map has been uploaded under the East Bay Regional Park District portion of that website. So that's now available to the group. And of course, you know, the equestrians have uploaded a number of resources from their perspective, as have the other user groups. So hopefully you all are finding time to access that page and avail yourself of those resources. So I don't want to take any more time here. This is just our intent to kind of remind us of where we've been and what's available to us as we move this process forward. So Devin, back to you for the main event of today.
Okay, thank you, Lou. So first we'll start with some Park District framing of the conservationist perspective. And in this case, my colleague Naomi is going to talk about the Park District Land Bank, which we know some of, but it's also sort of a, there's a lot of nuance to it that Naomi will start to explain. So Naomi.
Hi, thank you, Devin. Hold on just a moment. I'm going to share my screen with the presentation. All right, so yeah, I'm going to talk today a little broadly about planning and our general planning process, and then more specifically about conservation lands within the Park District, both our land bank and open parkland conservation lands. And then I'll talk through a couple of examples, the HCP and kind of the different guidelines that we're subject to when it comes to planning for recreation on the HCP and really just managing the lands in general. And then I will talk about kind of an upcoming project and just put it and frame it within kind of our planning process. So, so just generally, our planning process kind of follows 4 large phases, and some of these phases may be gone back to as conditions change or and needs change over the course of a project. But just generally, you know, we kind of have our initiation phase, which is really just phase 1, and this often starts with looking at our master plan priorities, and this can be for anything from just a smaller project, a restoration and public access project. You know, a staging area project, or up to kind of the larger land use plans and looking at kind of more of a landscape scale. But, you know, we really look at our master plan and the priorities that were laid out in the 2013 master plan. And then we'll form our project team. And this is really like an initial internal kind of scoping, getting input from different departments, operations, stewardship, you know, our design department, public safety. We really want to make sure that we have a broad team with a good representation from staff as we define the project and the extent. And then we'll move into kind of site assessment, and that's really gathering the data that we know about a site. So past studies that have been done, current studies that our stewardship team is working on, looking at the operational needs, the built environment, if there's already existing roads and other infrastructure. We really want to make sure that we understand well what is going on at whatever particular scale and scope and landscape we're looking at. And then we really develop kind of opportunities and constraints based on that assessment. What can we really do on the property? What are areas that we may need to avoid because of sensitive resources, biological or cultural or other, you know, and where are most appropriate sites for entering the property or exiting, and where should trails go and other recreational amenities. And then, you know, kind of maybe a phase 1.5, once we kind of sort of have an initial scope and sort of understanding of the project area, then we'll have kind of our first round of community and stakeholder input and engagement. And that's really where we start reaching out to specific groups and the community at large and begin to refine all alternatives. And that's moving into phase 2, where we develop alternatives, we use input, we will, we try and balance the project priorities and the master plan, and staff input and community needs. And so we're really at this point just developing the alternatives and the possibilities that on the property or the project area. And then in phase 3, it's another round of community and stakeholder input. This is where we're more formally presenting it to our board and other community groups and members. And this is where we start to refine the alternatives, and we start, addressing different input and additional stakeholder involvement, as well as staff. And if conditions change or needs change, we'll continue to refine those alternatives. And that's kind of what I mean by an iterative process. We might end up doing phase or 2 or 3 multiple times in order to really kind of refine and bring forward an alternative and a project that will really meet district needs, community needs, and not just the immediate surrounding neighbors, but also the regional district-wide community. And then phase 4, that's really where we have a refined alternative. We go through a formal adoption and approval process, and then we'll really have a plan that can move forward into more of an implementation phase. And that's where it sort of leaves planning and moves over to other departments for actual implementation of a project plan. So with all of these things, one thing that we really have to focus on when it comes to conservation is sort of understanding what we have to work with. And so this is just really broadly our parklands. We have around 125,000 acres, and 37,000 acres are now currently in land bank. Of that, what is currently in land bank, a little over 19,000 acres are in a special conservation status. So they're HCP lands, they have a conservation easement on them, they have some sort of specific conservation instrument that has been put in place on the property that kind of constricts what we can and cannot do. Overall, throughout the park district, we have about 25,000 acres, but that includes open parkland. So when we're kind of looking at what our current land bank, we have, over half of our land bank properties are in a special conservation status, which definitely, changes kind of our focus, where, the park district is really focused on addressing our dual mission of conservation and recreation. But on these lands with a special conservation status, the shift is a little bit more towards the resource protection and conservation, and less towards recreation. But we also,
yeah, hey Naomi, I was just going to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that, and it's correct to say that the special conservation status, that's a legal status, correct?
That's correct.
That doesn't take away from what our land use plans or other planning documents, what we determine to be resource protection areas or other designations just through the planning process. That's just an important distinction. So
yeah, apologize for not making that a little bit more clear. The conservation instruments are legal instruments that have been placed on the property that focuses the use of the property a little bit more specifically towards, and oftentimes they've been put in place because of mitigation for another project or a development project of some sort. So that, creates kind of a specific, there's often long-term management plans that really dictate how the property can be used and managed, monitored, reported on, and that's all to meet specific, oftentimes specific species goals as mitigation for a specific project. And then yes, in addition to that, and I don't have the acreages of these, we also, in addition, in our open parkland majority with land use plans, we will often go through a process of determining special resource protection areas that are not legal instrument required resource protection areas. But that is part of that iterative process as we go back and forth with our operations group and our stewardship group, our trails development group, as we try and figure out the best use of a property. And there will be areas that we will get feedback on based on this initial site assessment, that phase 1 and phase 2 part of the planning process, where it really will make sense because of specific species or even cultural resources, where we really want to protect an area as a special resource protection area, and we won't allow as high of a recreational use in those areas. And then also through that phasing, we'll also determine that there's other areas where, we can have a slightly higher intensity of recreational use for a variety of reasons. So specifically, the East Contra Costa County HCP. So this is an area where we've been acquiring a lot of our parkland, and this is where we also have a lot of our land bank properties. There's been overall, there's 41 properties within the HCP, and you can see it's mostly Clayton Ranch, Concord Hills, Black Diamond Mines, Vasco Hills, Byron Vernal Pools, and the Delta Access. Those are the major parks, and the communities of Brentwood and Oakley, Pittsburgh, Eastern Contra Costa County, Clayton. Those are the ones that are really focused with, this is mitigation for development projects within this area for those specific jurisdictions. And ultimately, there will be 30,000 acres preserved. The Park District will likely own the majority of these properties in partnership with we purchased the properties in partnership with the Conservancy, with the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy. The Park District is the landowner and will be for the majority of the properties. I think out of the 41 properties currently that have been currently purchased with the Conservancy, 39 are owned by the Park District. And so these properties are subject to the Habitat Conservation Plan that was developed. And that conservation plan has specific guidelines with regard to recreation. So as we're approaching recreation planning on these properties, we really have to look towards what these recreation guidelines and it's dictate, and it really focuses on passive recreation and low intensity recreation. Dogs will have to be on leash if they are allowed, which they may or may not be, depending on what ends up ultimately being approved by the resource agencies. The recreation plan has to not only be approved by the Park District and the Conservancy, but also by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It'll be really important to not have a lot of off-trail use, so people will really need to stick to trails. And we don't have a lot of allowance for new trail construction. So we'll be really trying to utilize the existing ranch road, service road infrastructure, though we are trying to look towards creating, not just reliance on the ranch roads, but really, how can we make effective loops? So there will be some new trail construction, though always we have to keep in mind, what the guidelines say and what can and cannot happen with recreation. And there will also be limited amenities in terms of staging areas and recreation areas. The access points will not be perhaps as what we are accustomed to in other parts of the district. But it is an exciting opportunity to really kind of have some landscape scale conservation and connecting properties that are really going to benefit species in Eastern Contra Costa County. And then more recently, we are initiating a project. So this is really in a phase 1, but we recently acquired the Chenard Winery off of Palomares Road. And this is in between Pleasanton Ridge and Guerin. And it's been a long-standing regional trail goal in the master plan to connect Guerin to Pleasanton Ridge. And we have properties both to the west of Palomares Road and to the east of Palomares Road. But we've kind of been missing sort of a link and an appropriate area to kind of access properties to either direction. And with the Chenard Winery, it's a really great opportunity. And with the recent acquisition, we can really now begin to look on how can we fulfill this master plan priority. So we've just started kind of the initial assessment. We're looking at the conditions at the winery. It will make likely a very appropriate staging area with access on either side. And we're kind of in the moment where we're collecting staff input and really conducting our opportunities and constraints analysis to see what's the best way to connect these properties. And these properties are not necessarily some are, but the main ones that are not currently under a land use plan, Owens and Robertson, are not necessarily, they're not constrained by a legal conservation instrument. But as we go through this iterative process, we will be looking at, how can we use the existing service roads really to make this regional trail connection, and continuing our biological assessments, cultural resource assessments, and understanding what will be needed from an operational perspective as well as a recreational perspective, and how to best use these lands, open them to public access while at the same time really focusing on looking at it where we can or cannot establish resource protection areas. Where is it appropriate to have recreation or not have recreation? And I think in all of our intent, we really are looking towards balancing our dual mission with both, public access, but also open space protection. And I think with any staff that approaches a project at the park district, we're always keeping in mind our dual mission as a park district. And we really look forward to kind of starting the public input part of this particular project, connecting these two large parks. So with that, I'm happy to answer any specific questions or add more detail, or Suzanne, if you want to add anything, please. Suzanne's kind of my partner in this framing, if she would like to speak.
I have a question regarding the HCP lands.
Yes.
Now, is that just Contra Costa County?
That's correct. It's just within that map area that I showed you. It's just eastern Contra Costa County.
And so some of those are also mitigation lands. The HCP and the mitigation lands are kind of two different Venn diagrams that sometimes intersect.
Yeah, so all of the HCP lands are mitigation lands. So all of them have been acquired as specific mitigation for development projects within that area of eastern Contra Costa County. But there are also conservation easements on specific HCP lands. But
because I thought many of those lands had been transferred from Save Mount Diablo, so were they mitigation lands? I would think they weren't.
Those would be separate.
Yeah,
those would be separate. The HCP is essentially the way it works is that for development in Pittsburgh, Brentwood, they're able to get permits. But
yeah, I know what the HCP is.
Okay.
I've read, just a very specific question. So I've read through the conservation easement document for quite a lot of those lands. And it actually doesn't mention dogs. It mentions many things you can't do there.
So yeah, Kathy, so there's two properties in the Clayton Ranch area that were purchased right at the time that the HCP was being formed. And they were purchased by Save Mount Diablo. And then as the kind of got complicated, but Save Mount Diablo had basically transferred the property to the park district. And the part of the negotiation was that those properties would be subject to the HCP. So even though the purchase documents at that time that Save Mount Diablo purchased them don't mention the HCP, in later documents they are incorporated into the HCP. So then they are subject to the guidelines. If that makes sense.
I don't see, having read through all that, I didn't see any specific mention of dogs in the conservation easement. Maybe I just missed it.
So the conservation easement is slightly separate. So the conservation easement, there are, so on those two properties, there are some conservation easements, and those easements may or may not mention dogs. It sounds like they don't, but the remainder of the land, so if it's like a 200-acre property and there's like a 60-acre conservation easement, the remainder of that 200 acres, that 140 acres would be subject to the HCP and then subject to the dog restrictions. So even if that,
I mean, I'm not trying to belabor this too much, but I read through those documents. Now, I'm not a lawyer or a planner, but I saw no mention of dogs. I saw mention of many, many things you can't do. I mean, apparently they're not going to be building sports fields or,
right. So you read through the acquisition documents themselves and the concept. So I'm happy to continue this conversation offline if you and I want to talk, but it is those properties are a little complicated, but ultimately they are still subject to the HCP guidelines, which does have the dog restrictions. If they've been incorporated into the HCP's mitigation land, preserve land network, then they'll still be subject. Even if the specific conservation easement within that area doesn't mention dogs, the overall property use is still subject to the HCP.
Thanks.
Can I ask a simple question, which is, of those obviously the restrictions on all the lands vary from property to property, and some may be total restriction on any development or any opening, and others may be things like dogs are not allowed here, where bicycles may not be allowed on some. I really don't know what they are. Of those 19,000 acres, how many are prescribed from ever being open to the public at all?
Oh, very, very few, if any, would be never prescribed to the public. Most conservation, I think there's maybe one conservation easement that we have that doesn't allow public access. But most of them do. Oftentimes the public access is restricted to existing roads. So we're not allowed to build new trails. And we also have to kind of really communicate to the public when we open those properties that, off trail use, will be highly discouraged. So there might be specific things that we'll have to convey each time, but very few, if any at all, that I can recall off the top of my head are actually restrict any public access at all.
So of the 37,000 acres, almost all of them will at some point be open to the public, and about half of them will have some restrictions that are not just that vary from place to place.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Just in the interest of time, I think we should move on. If you all have other questions for Naomi, just go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll continue the dialogue there, I guess. But I also want to encourage everybody to focus on our next presentation. So Devin, you want to introduce the next set of presentations and we'll take it on. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. I learned something from that, and I know we all will. The next presentations are going to begin, I believe, with Naomi Wilson of the Regional Park Association. So let's start with Mimi.
Good morning. We can hear you, Mimi.
I can hear you.
I'm sorry. I thought Devin was going to unmute me. Good morning. I'm Naomi Wilson, and I'm president of Regional Parks Association. Since 1947, RPA's primary purpose has been protection of natural resources in the East Bay, with major emphasis on the lands entrusted to East Bay parks. Lands that were originally preserved for recreational purpose, but lands now highly valued for their natural resources also. RPA has a board of 9 elected members, and through study and research, we disseminate educational and scientific information, not only to our members, but to the general public as well. But we also keep a sharp eye on East Bay parks, policies, and activities. And thus, RPA and others became alarmed because the 2013 Park Master Plan seemed to imply a goal of all trails for all users. And that seemed justification in the newly acquired Costa property to allow bicycles to traverse a sensitive patch of rare grasses listed in CEQA. Proposed alterations to existing trails to establish multi-use and connectivity without careful scientific research of wildlife disturbance, that also disturbs us. Thus, from our voiced concerns, the seeds of this trail users working group were planted. This committee, with its somewhat awkward acronym, has explored safety concerns for multi-use narrow trails. But not so much has been said about equally serious concerns about the natural resource destruction from multi-use on narrow trails and by rogue bicycle trails. But not today. Today is a loud shout out for coyotes and cougars, newts, fence lizards, eagles and hummingbirds, cobwebby thistle, California poppies, redwood groves, stunning vistas, sunrise and sunsets. Today, let's talk about values and stewardship. Retired park naturalist Tim Gordon, in his beautiful little booklet, The Heart of Wildcat Canyon, entreats us, if we do our job as stewards of the land, generations will be grateful. And so, he continues, let us plan and develop and use the land as wisely and as gently as we can. Park Place is a fine place to walk, run, breathe fresh air, go exploring on a bike, It's a fine place in which to lose oneself, to sing, to dance, to write a poem, to enjoy the sights and sounds and smells of this small piece of the natural world. A window on the universe, Tim wrote. Trails allow all generations to open the park district's windows on the natural world. It's sort of the master plan in a nutshell. But by its very nature, a trail and its users are intrusion on the land. And thus, we believe trail planning must allow the land itself to dictate the very first steps. Designating trail use before proper habitat studies may render the land no longer a fine place. Good stewardship requires us as users to speak up when we're troubled, and for the park district to exercise its responsibility to listen carefully to all ideas to keep the parks a fine place. Hear what we say today, East Bay Parks. Listen, everyone who enters its boundaries. Respect the land and protect the joy that Parkland gives us. Assure forever happy trails for plant life, for wildlife, for human life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you. Who was going to be next?
That would be me, Norman LaForce.
Okay.
So I
Norman, please.
can put on my PowerPoint. Is that up for people to see?
Can't see that yet.
We'd like you to share your screen.
Oh, okay.
You know how to do that, Norman.
So down on the bottom toolbar, there should be a green button there.
Okay. It says one participant can share.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ah, there we go. Okay. All righty, everybody can see it?
Success.
Yes.
All right, I can do something technologically. Yeah.
Wonderful. And
So,
then Norman, if you could go to the top of it and hit the slideshow. Right. Yeah, there you go. And from beginning.
okay. Yeah, this is Norman LaForce. I'm chair of the Sierra Club East Bay Public Lands Committee, speaking today on behalf of the Sierra Club and also for Helen Burke, facilitator for STEP, Safe Trails, Environmental Protection. The major conservation organizations that are participating in this working group have always supported appropriate access for recreation in our regional parks, consistent with protecting and enhancing wildlife and wildlife habitat and protecting cultural sites and artifacts. We have always supported a user-friendly experience in our parks. Park use has increased for all users. Mountain bike use has also increased, but is still only 12 to 15% of total users based on current information. There is a place for mountain biking in our regional parks, especially for youth who are supervised and where they can be assured safe and interesting rides. Mountain biking has inherent conflicts with habitat and wildlife protection and the user experience. Mountain biking access on narrow trails seriously challenges the user experience for hikers and equestrians. Narrow trails cannot be safely enjoyed or shared with mountain bikes. It is not just an issue of a few bad apples. If we are to arrive at solutions, we cannot ignore this fact. There are just too many examples of conflict. The conflict is due in part to the desire of many mountain bikers for a thrill experience. Gary Fisher, pioneer in mountain biking, put it this way: mountain bikers want corners and obstacles to get over and downhills. Often these trails were built in whatever woods were nearest by, no matter whose they were. Just recently, Scott Bartlebaugh also expressed this desire in discussing meetings with the Park District, stating in part, advanced trails have not been explicitly defined, but they, the Park District, have an understanding that there is interest in more technically challenging trails with drops and jumps. And I put down here just 3 examples of what are probably mountain bike park trails that'll show you just what kind of technically challenging trails can be created. On behalf of Sierra Club and STEP, we called for various groups to engage in a process to try to find common ground and come up with solutions. We did this with EdMud, but the working group apparently is not going to make recommendations for solutions. This is troubling because the participants in this working group not only have the knowledge of the issue, but also a commitment to reaching solutions. We should be making recommendations to the park board. We do know that a number of questions need to be addressed for us to have a successful outcome for this working group. One, what does the mountain bike community really want? All narrow trails open for mountain bikes? Mountain bike parks like Crockett Hills? Mountain bikes only narrow trails and such trails in every park? Two, new trails in existing parks with land use plans, LUPs, must go through the legal land use plan amendment process with full environmental review. If the mountain bike community wants to open up more narrow trails in existing parks that have LUPs, where are the funds in the park district budget for a LUPA and for increased costs of environmental review, trail maintenance, repair, and enforcement that will accompany those new bike trails? Does the park district have the funds to do LUPAs for existing parks and also LUPs for the land banked areas? Three, the ecological health of the parks is critical. Before any new trails are considered, stewardship needs to evaluate and identify the larger important natural habitat areas within the park system that serve as a refuge and corridors for wildlife, for ground-based species, for bird nesting and habitat, and for rare native flora and important and sensitive native plant communities. And in fact, stewardship really should be part of this working group. The notion advanced by the mountain bike community and park district that engineering can solve the user conflict issues and road trail concerns is not a solution, because any engineered solution first requires assumptions about the values that you are engineering for. And narrow trails for mountain bikes assumes different values for narrow trails for hikers and equestrians. The mountain bike advocates propose 3 E's, engineering, education, and enforcement, but that ignores 2 other E's, environmental protection and the user experience. You can certainly take a 2-lane roadway and re-engineer and reconstruct it to be a 4-lane roadway, but that environmental impact and user experience changes dramatically. Similarly, engineering narrow trails for mountain bikes assumes a different user experience from a trail for pedestrians and horses, and can have environmental impacts that are not present on trails designed for hikers and horses. Sierra Club and STEP's goal is to get a consensus on solutions we can recommend to the park board. We need solutions that can work for the reasonably foreseeable future, not recommendations that will engender continued conflict and require the park district to spend resources and people and money on dealing with continued conflicts. That's the position of Sierra Club and STEP.
Okay, Norman, thank you. Jim, were you going to be next?
Actually, this is Pam. I'm next.
Okay, Pam, please. Pam Young.
Okay, thanks. Does anyone know what it means when it says 1 and 2? Oh, I think I know what it means. Okay, hang on.
Do you see the green share screen button on the bottom toolbar? Pam?
Yeah, let me try that. Yeah,
there
we go. Can you see that? Okay, great.
Yes.
Let me just set it up as a slideshow. Find this. Okay, here we go. And let me just start by saying that Golden Gate Audubon leads mountain bike birding tours. So we enjoy mountain biking. I enjoy mountain biking as a birder. And also, I just want to point out that I completely agree with what Brian said, that trails with a human presence automatically have an impact, and I hope that's an assumption that we can all take away from this workshop. And then next, I want to say that GGAS birders ascribe to an ethics oath where we expect to conduct ourselves to protect wildlife. We don't call in birds, for example. We don't disclose where rare bird nest habitats are. And I would encourage that consideration here. So now I'm going to start the slide. And my first question to you all is mountain biking an extreme sport? Because this presentation is about the extreme version of mountain biking and the off-trail illegal mountain biking. And some derivatives of mountain biking are considered extreme, and have unacceptable ecological impacts. And furthermore, the extreme mountain bikers appear not to show any concern for the natural environment. These higher impacts show particularly strongly when there is strong braking, skidding, and cornering. And these additional impacts are even more profound when these unauthorized off-trail activities take place.
Hey, Pam, just real quick, before you go, it would be helpful if you just hit the swap displays button, because we're seeing your sort of notes view right now.
Oh, okay. Give me a sec. How do
See that
I
on
do
the
that?
upper left-hand corner? Just
swap displays.
Swap displays.
Stop displays, upper left-hand corner.
Well, now push play from start or play from current
Play
slide.
from start.
Play from current start. Current slide. Yeah.
Okay, I gotta find my cursor. Okay, so play from start.
Play from current
and
slide.
what do you see now? Do you see that?
Now you
or
see the upper left, in the upper left-hand corner, it says swap displays.
Oh, great. Okay, let me go to that. I'm having trouble finding my cursor. Oh, there it is. There we go. How about that? Is that better?
There you go. There you go. You got it. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I appreciate that. So I think that extreme sports where these higher impacts occur and these off-trail activities occur don't belong in the East Bay parks because the impacts are just too extreme. And as Brian said, it just can't be enforced and patrolled and get people to stay on the legal trails. So in the Tilden Nature Area, where biking is not permitted except on the fire trail, mountain bikers go all over those trails. Sylvan, Pack Rat, Jewel Lake Trail, all the track marks are there. And sometimes even more damage occurs wherein a really high value habitat that was occupied by over 40 bird species is basically gone. This mixed species guild of birds included the rare special status protected olive-sided flycatcher. That bird is hardly present in this particular area. I witnessed 6 mountain bikers racing through Pack Rat Trail at 6:30 in the morning on March 24th. Efforts are being made to control this. A new no bike sign was put up at the Sylvan Trail with a red circle and slash. And then one of the loops I take all the time is the Tilden Wildcat Gorge Curran Meadows Canyon Trails loop in Tilden. And there are over 40 off-trail illegal mountain bike trails that show tremendous damage with erosion running off into the creek. And the mountain bikers even ride across the creek, down the creek. I talked to a mountain biker who was in the creek. And this results in something called habitat fragmentation. Some of you may understand this, that it, instead of having continuous high productive habitat, it drastically cuts biodiversity and increases the fire risk. Mountain bike night riding severely disturbs wildlife. Technically, we're not supposed to be in the parks at night, but they go. This is a picture I took of a mountain biker at night as I was leaving my hike. And even the mountain bikers realized their bright lights and blazing speeds really scared the wildlife. On Big Springs Trail, where some of you I'm sure go to, there are quite a few ground nesting birds and good foraging habitat. Over 20 bird species nest on or near the ground, including our own state bird, the California quail. The spotted towhees nest near the ground. And when mountain bikes go off trail, they destroy that habitat and they eliminate the nesting activity. Here's a golden crown sparrow. It used to forage near the Big Springs Trail, and it can't forage there because the mountain bikes come racing down there, and now they've actually degraded the habitat itself. Mountain bikes do exceed the speed limits. They even yell at myself and my group. They said, stay out of our way. We come down really fast. And even some of the mountain bikers say they don't want to go 15 miles an hour. It ruins the sport. Here are some mountain bikers skipping up an illegal slope, which, by the way, is where I used to see the protected Alameda whip snake, because it goes down to a drainage, an ephemeral stream. Well, I don't know any whipsnake that's going to survive this activity. These activities have direct and cumulative impacts. Direct impacts are when they flush the wildlife out of the way, or worse, injure them. And then the cumulative impacts over time and again, these trails create damage that kills the plant communities and destroys the soil conditions. They're not even supposed to be on the trails if it's damp, if it's a wet habitat. And it's now considered the single greatest threat to wildlife habitat integrity by some biologists. But keep in mind, this is the wildlife living room where we're going when we go in through the parks and we go off trail. But we can do things. We can protect high value habitat, restrict mountain biking to approved trails, require orientation and education, establish regular mountain bike enforcement patrols in the parks, study the impacts, exclude damaged trails, increase the fines, and use that money to restore the damaged trails, and possibly at worst exclude repeat offenders and or require permits. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Pam. And then finally, we have Jim Hansen, California Native Plant Society. Jim, do you have your presentation?
Yes, I do. Thanks.
Pam, can you
Ready
stop sharing your screen? Thanks. There you go. Okay.
Well, first of all, hello, everybody. It's good to see everybody again and to continue this really important conversation. So really appreciate the opportunity. And, you know, I learned something new about the conservation lands. So thank you for providing us. That was a really helpful overview. So I will attempt to share screen. Oh, good. Okay, we found it. And we'll go to, if we can get all these other things out of the way, because I'm seeing a lot of bars hiding some of my toolbar here, excuse me.
If you go right to where it says slideshow,
Right
there you go.
Just hiding, I'm sorry, under the, there we go. Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to try to close a window so I can see this. Okay, great. I'm going to talk a little bit about, my name is Jim Hansen. I'm Conservation Chair for the volunteer with California Native Plant Society East Bay Chapter. And I'll share some perspectives just from this conversation so far and from our experience on managing the narrow trail. I think that's a lot of what we're really talking about. So what I'll be talking about is kind of what we're hearing in our discussions and among our members and neighbors and so forth, and what we're seeing on the trails. And this whole question of how to manage for multiple uses. And I'll be bringing up something I'm going to call the 2 E's. I think we've heard a little bit about the 3 E's, and I'll go into that a little further. So what we're hearing is that there's rising mountain bike popularity. I think we've heard that a lot of times from the mountain biking community and from the park district. And I just want to say that what we're seeing is that, I just want to bring the point up that we're seeing rising trail walking popularity too. And I think that's been particularly evident during the last year or more. That on-foot uses of hiking and walking, running and jogging, and dog walking, combined with equestrians, have been rising proportionally on our trails too. I think there was I remember Brian talking about a 30% increase in the parks. And when I look back at some of the previous trail studies, including the most recent one in 2020, it seems to verify that point. So, but we're also hearing within our group that I think a lot of focus has been on that multi-use on narrow trails can be expanded with, this has come up several times, mountain biking one day, hikers and equestrians others. occasional bulb outs. And Devin, I grabbed a photo. I had not really had a photo example of that before. I grabbed an example from that was provided to the Trail User Working Group website. So a number of different things that would allow multi-use to be on narrow trails. And in some, I think what came up at the last meeting is that we can manage multi-use on narrow trails through engineering, education, and enforcement. And I will use multi-use in parentheses. I don't know if the public fully understands what that means, because they're used to multiple on-foot and equestrian uses on narrow trails. And in this case, it's my understanding, really being used to describe all users on narrow trails. So I think that's an important one, which can get a little confusing. So my question really is, where are the two E's in this equation to date? And that's part of the reason we're talking today, particularly the park natural environment and the trail user experience, because really different uses have different impacts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing. With regard to the park natural environment, we look at we have a lot of trees in our parks, a lot, and they're an important part of our park experience, and they have sensitive root zones. We look at trail conditions. That's part of our direct experience with the parks and accessing them. And as Native Plant Society, both in terms of our use of the parks, we really look at the park native flora, because that really is what people are going to see and supports the incredible diversity, biodiversity in our parks. And lastly, erosion, an important thing for any natural area. Oops, sorry, jumping ahead. Sensitive plant root zones. I'm showing some examples of just taking pictures out on the trail, and the photo on the left, I'm just going to call not multi-use. I didn't have time to check if it was both hiking and equestrian or just hiking. So I'm just calling it not multi-use. So this is, and then on the right, this is a trail that is officially designated in multi-use. Now it's another public land in our East Bay Hills. But this includes mountain biking, walking, equestrian, and the impacts on the root zone, which are compacting it, are not from the walking and equestrian. So this is one of the impacts we're seeing with a multi-use trail. Trail conditions. This is a heavily used walking trail. I believe this was at Sibley. It adjoins a new McCosker property and would be affected by it. And on the right, and the light sometimes shows things heavier than they seem, but it is an example of an official multi-use, where one of the common things that I'm seeing, both where it's permitted and unpermitted, is this banking effect as the bikes come down the trail. Another impact, of course, one dear to us, is the native flora, and one dear to all of us. And I know, we know that. So this is on the left is a not multi-use trail. I believe it's both hiking and equestrian. And here we have walkers stopping and looking at the trillium that have come out. Actually, this was this spring along the trail, right along the trail, and certainly can be very heavily impacted by it. On the right is on the upper right-hand corner is, this is not a rare plant, but it's a wonderful one. It's one of the many Clarkia species that grow along the trail banks, along the flat hillsides, that come out at different times, spring actually through later in the year, and people really appreciate, and obviously the pollinators do too. It's part of what supports the greater wildlife within the parks. To the right, the little pink circle is just that same flower, but an illegal trail has cut down right through it. In fact, it's cut down through that whole population. But then when you stand back, and this is the picture in the middle, there are several trails that were cut through the hillside and thus the population of something that's enjoyed and part of that park system. And then we have to look at, everybody has to look at erosion. The one on the left, again, is a Sibley, basically walking and I believe equestrian trail. On the right is a picture from actually a walking only trail. It's supposed to be it's marked clearly as a walking only trail, Pleasanton Ridge. It has been used now. When I'm looking at the cut that you see in the orange arrow there, the bank top there, walkers do create non-permitted trails. But when we looked at that closely, that it's a very compacted top, and it appears to me to be unpermitted multi-use. In this case, a bike impact on a walking only trail. So these are some environmental impacts of different uses. And I think we just have to look at these and consider them. But the other part of the equation, of course, and these are both part of the central to the park district's mission, both the environment and the trail and the park user, is a trail user experience. And we're all looking for all of us, for a safe and satisfying trail experience. We know that. But we also want to look at emphasizing what actual trail users have said that they favor. Again, on the left, hiking and I believe equestrian trail. On the right is a trail that I was on, and there's a young family in the back there. I talked to them. Now, my experience on the trail was some of the folks using this mountain bike trail that had bikes slowed down or stopped, and others didn't. And what I talked to this family, and she was out with her son and daughter. It was a Sunday afternoon, and they were really actually quite distressed. They came out for an enjoyable trail experience and weren't having one. I think we have to look at that. And then emphasizing what actual trail users have said they favor. I mean, from my reading of the surveys and being out on the trails, and that park use is rising in general, and that the major trail use continues to be hikers, walkers, assisted trail users, runners, joggers, and folks out walking their dogs. And the picture right above that is Redwood. I think a lot of us have been out to the parks, eager to get out, and this was just back in March. That shows heavy use by a lot of folks, and of course the picture on the right is just some folks walking. And I felt that this trail users working group has really been helpful to get the bigger picture. We've heard that there's, I found it astounding, like 25 million annual park users, which probably has increased. And the slide, I just took a screenshot, thank you, Sean, from where you were explaining trail use mileage by type. And kind of the perspective that I've seen looking at the surveys is that we're seeing proportional increases of use, both by walkers and hikers and equestrians and mountain bikers at the same time. And that I remember you described that the mountain biking community has access to 25% currently of narrow surface trails. And then when you add up the unpaved roads, the paved trails, and the portion of narrow trails, that would be access to 88% of park trails in total. So I think you're doing a good job. I think you're trying to service all the different users. But I'd make a little footnote right at the bottom right that what I've heard during this is that youth would like some technical trails, and I'll kind of return to that right at the end. But again, I'm going back to stressing the role of the park natural environment and the trail user experience as really the starting point of anything we do. Sorry. An example. What could we add to this? I think designing system-wide with an evaluation of park natural resource areas. And Devin, thank you. This is a photo, or what you provided in terms of the land banked areas. And it really is interesting that these land banked areas, a lot of them do adjoin to existing parks and thus existing park trails. So anything we do here affects both the existing park and the land banked areas. So we really need to look at native plant community diversity park-wide, rare and unusual plant species, habitat for threatened and endangered species, migration corridors, nesting and foraging habitat, starting with that central mission of the district in our planning. And secondly, the trail user experience. A safe and satisfying trail user experience. Honestly, being on the alert and dodging mountain bikes and narrow trails is not a good one, and sometimes has resulted in a physically harmful one, and these are for the majority of our park users. At the same time, what we're hearing is that multi-use on narrow trails can be managed for land-based properties with these following points. Well, I think it would be helpful to have an in-depth talk about these proposed multi-use mitigations and bring in each of these, starting with the 2 E's, the environment and the trail user experience. And secondly, all trail uses are greatly increasing popularity. And thus, the use of trails by both pedestrian and equestrian users compared to mountain biking appears to be rising proportionally. But what we're also hearing is that youth would like some technical trails. And frankly, they're very honest. It's difficult for them to have hikers and equestrians on those trails. So maybe we should talk about bringing this into the conversation to also bring in the 2 E's. In sum, talking about park nail trail policies, let's include from the start protection of the park natural environment and the trail user experience, these 2 E's in all our discussions, to manage for different uses that have differing impacts. Thank you.
Great. Thanks to all our presenters today. Very provocative statements and thoughts and ideas. And we made a little adjustment in our typical agenda for today to allow some response and reaction to the presentations that have been made. Just about a 10-minute comment period right now, open comment. Please just raise your hand in the participant window or wave at me. I'll try to take the hands as I see them. Just some initial reactions, and then we will launch into our breakout groups and allow for a little bit smaller group discussions and come back again after those discussions to hear back what everybody had to say and then conclude our meeting. So again, just an opportunity, reflections. Morris, your hand went up first, so I'm going to call on you. Please be succinct and concise. If you've heard something, if you have something to say that supports or echoes somebody else, just say ditto, or just to allow as many people as possible to speak. So Morris, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to get in the queue. I thought everybody else would be jumping on this.
I'm sure there will be.
Mostly what I wanted to say was that it's easy to blame any one user group for the damage caused to trails. But as someone who's worked on building trails for over 30 years, it's very apparent that most trails were not originally designed as trails. They were designed as ranch roads and then acquired by park districts or other parks. And they were not designed with maintenance in mind. And the results of those are erosion is a huge issue on all trails. The kind of braided trails that Jim was showing are common in many, many parks. Trails that are too steep are common in many, many parks. This is true of both fire roads and of narrow trails, and predates mountain biking. Gullies on trails that are due to erosion go back to, you know, as long as I've been alive, basically. I was told by a trail runner that basically trail runners, when it's wet outside, deliberately run in the creek on the trails because they know that when they splash their foot in the water, it's hitting a soft spot underneath. Whereas on the side, it's going to be muddy and they're going to slip. You know, so that's an example of deliberately trying to, you know, ignoring the impacts on trails. And I think that all of us try to ignore impacts on trails. S. Anderson said that equestrians should not go out when their hoof prints impact a trail more than a quarter inch. But equestrians can also impact trails and collapse the side of trails, as can hikers. And hikers, being the dominant user group, probably have more impact on trails than any other group. The point is to manage that impact and keep it in bounds without denying people opportunities for recreation.
Okay, thank you, Morris. Thank you. Scott's next, and then Luana. So Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just a couple of points I'd like to touch on. I think we made it clear in the cycling presentation that it's not all extreme sports that we're looking for. That is a fraction of it. We did describe that there is a spectrum from on the mild end to things that are more technically challenging. There are many cyclists that like the connectivity and just the core of their experience is getting out in nature, traveling across the landscape, enjoying the vistas, as that was presented today, that's part of the conservation value to the property as well, to the land. So I think it was painted in a very small segment of what the mountain biking community is looking for today. And I think second, there was a lot of talk about restrictions. It's heavily restricted now, and it doesn't appear that that is working. And I think Brian had statements to that effect in the opening remarks today. And I don't think it is practical through just restriction and enforcement to prevent the impacts that are occurring. I think one of the best options is providing places that do meet the needs of the user groups to restrict, or well, to de-incentivize road trail building, braiding of trails, and the damage that was demonstrated. I think those are better options than trying to lock it down. I don't think locking things down further or at the current level is an effective solution. So those are the two items I wanted to touch on. There's plenty more there, but
great.
Those I think are the tops. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you. Luana.
Hi, I just wanted to give some quick remarks. I was kind of disappointed in this round of presentations. I felt that the framing of the presentations didn't give me a broader understanding of the conservationists' perspectives about trails. I felt that these presentations really focused on making as far as bikers of the enemy, and that's just not really in the spirit of this working group. Second, I do think that Norm needed to address the article and how that article he wrote made some of the members feel, and just as far as how the article was not in spirit of the working group. I think we all deserve an explanation rather than just hearing about something in a broader sense or indirectly speaking about the elephant in the room. Third, walkers, hikers, runners, and equestrians all have negative impacts on the trails. And I can think of 2E trails, such as the Columbine Trail, that have been negatively impacted by the increased use of walkers. And just as a trail runner who's always trying to go on those remote, narrow type trails, even the ones that are restricted have seen such an increase of usership this year that that type of usage is making a heavy impact. So I think as far as a group, we really need to see how do we become solution oriented, because each of these different groups that are here, we're learning about those negative different type of impacts, but we need to frame things in a way where we're really learning how to work together to solve issues. And I just expected more from the presenters today. And those are just my comments.
Thanks, Luana. I do think that we will, we are trying to solicit solution-oriented ideas in our breakout groups, and we're collecting those strategies and solutions, I think, rather than sort of attacking one user group and getting defensive. I think we are trying to pose these discussions as solutions-oriented, and I think that we'll see that. When we get to our later meetings, where we have an opportunity to look back at all of the strategies and solutions that have been suggested and determine which of these we think have the most support from our working group that we'd like to advance, I think that'll be a great opportunity to indicate where we think the best possibilities or potential for multi-user groups or multi-use trails can be. Adele, you're next. I think you're the last hand that I see, and I think we are just about to run out of time for this open discussion period.
Okay, well, thank you. I just wanted to say, I thank you, Luana. She said a lot of things that were kind of going through my mind. And, but I also want to say that, these presentations were to get the perspective of these different groups. So, as the PAC representative, and I'm also a hiker, a runner, a trail user of all sorts, but I'm also a mountain biker. And my initial reaction was like, gosh, I feel like I'm just being bashed as a mountain biker. Everybody hates me. This is when I'm on my mountain bike, this is terrible. But then, that was like Pam's presentation. But at the end, she she came out with that last slide that had, all these things that to consider. So, she made a really good point of, what the hiker and the environmental perspective is. And I think that seeing the pictures, the photos that the different presenters showed of actual sites was very helpful for us to understand. And, as a mountain biker, I don't condone people like destroying habitat. And so that's something that needs to be addressed. I really like Jim's presentation in that it, really kind of also pointed out the different situations and different needs. And I also really liked, Norm's bringing up the 2 E's and then Jim reinforcing that. I think that's really good. One thing that I would like to suggest is that at some point we take the big map of all the lands, and sorry, I'm plugging in my computer right now because it's about to die. Okay. The big map with all the lands and look at what we have and where there are restrictions and look at what connections are being tried to make and we're trying to make, and also like where the demand is for the different uses, for more hiking, for more equestrians, for more mountain biking. So where are the opportunities when we look at the big picture? Where are the populations that we are serving and the needs? And then we're looking at opportunities and constraints. And I think that would be really helpful as we move forward into, the design of and provision of trail systems. Anyway, that was it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for your comments and reflections on the presentations. And again, thank you to the presenters for giving us a lot to think about. We'd like to move into our breakout groups now. And again, this is just an opportunity for us in smaller circles to respond and reflect. And our 2 questions that we're posing today in the groups is the first, what assumptions do you think are important for the district to consider in developing new trails? So that would be, are we trying to make all trails multi-use? Are we Are we open, are we assuming that there will be some trails that are devoted to single use or different operational times for different uses? What are those assumptions that you think the district should be considering in developing new trails? So that's question number one. And the second question, you don't have to remember these, they'll be on your breakout groups. And the second is, what ideas do you have for promoting conservation goals and minimizing the impacts of trail use? So again, getting to that solutions-oriented discussion, what ideas? And thanks to the presenters for proposing a few of these. Let's talk about those, let's consider those, and see if we can come up with some ideas that we think are worth considering that could help to promote conservation and minimize impacts. So with that, Amanda, I think, is ready to launch our breakout groups. You'll be asked to just join. There's a note taker in each group. You're going to be self-facilitating. You have 35 minutes, so use the time however you'd like, maybe a little bit on the first question and most of the time on the strategies. It's up to you all. And we'll give you some time indications of when it's time to start wrapping up and choose a presenter and we'll have a presenter from each of the 5 groups give a brief overview of the highlights from that discussion. So that's our process. Thanks everybody for staying with us. I hope some of those of you who've been listening in and not jumping into the conversation will feel empowered now to speak your mind. So we really want to hear from as many people as possible. Okay, Amanda, take it away.